I'm going to speak about the new CPSC so-called third-party testing rule for children's products, which goes into effect on a mandatory basis February 8th, 2013. That's about 2.5 weeks from now. Next slide. My name is Fred Mills-Winkler. I'm the Technical Director at SGS based in New Jersey for toys and children's products. I've had going on 44 years in the toys and children's products industry, large number of years in manufacturing, 15 years of living in Asia, working closely with the factories, and I've been with SGS now for almost 4 years. My focus is on product safety and compliance to regulatory regulations. My associate colleague, Mr. Scott Nesson down here, he will be your contact for any questions. He has information that can be shared. And please stop by our booth at 2155, up the hallway. Next slide. So, let's talk about adult costumes first. Adult items. Technically, they're classified as clothing and textiles, textiles. They're subject, if anything, to the 1610 Code of Federal Regulations, flammability tests, and vinyl, anything that's made of vinyl film like capes and other items would be subject to a 1611 flammability test. Other than that, there are no real requirements for adult costumes. For accessory items, except for cosmetics and body and face paint, temporary tattoos and anything that's skin contact type material, those are subject to FDA requirements for skin irritation and toxicity, but generally speaking, there are no other requirements for adult costume accessories. Under federal law, we're talking about US federal law right now. Home and yard decor, all that stuff you put out at Halloween and party times, there's really no requirements for those under federal law unless they happen to be carpets or rugs which have flammability requirements, and anything that's electrically operated obviously has to be UL listed. Other laws that affect these products are the CPSA, which is the Consumer Product Safety Act, which has been in effect probably since the 50s and 60s last century. The Federal Hazardous Substances Act, the FHSA, which is tied to the CPSA, and the Flammability of Fabrics Act. There's a couple of others, which is there's an act for the closure caps, drugs or medications that have to be childproof, but it doesn't really affect this industry. And there is, of course, California Proposition 65, which we will talk about separately because they've just had a whole new thing happening with that. Next slide, please. So let's talk about children's costumes under the federal regulations. Technically, they are going to be classified as clothing or clothing textiles, and they're subject to the same flammability requirements as adult costumes. Anything made for a child is classified as a children's product under federal law. Children's costume accessories, if you're talking about, like pirate swords, princess tiaras, magic wands, pistols, anything that's not a textile costume is generally going to be tested as a toy, which is under the ASTM F963 toy standard, which includes cosmetic requirements for the FDA. It also includes microbiological testing for anything that's a liquid or a paste or a gel, which may include makeup or lip gloss and things like that. That also has to undergo microbiological testing under the USP requirements. And with the CPSIA, which is the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, that includes a mandatory third-party testing requirement, which I'll talk some more about in a minute. Okay, first of all, let's talk about children's products and what are under the law. Next, please. Oh, I think you back up one. There you go. Thank you. Children's costumes. Sorry, go ahead one, Mike. Sorry. That's the next one. So let's just, for those of you who don't know, I'll just give you a little bit of history on the CPSIA, the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. It went into effect August 13th, 2008. Remember, I keep that in my head constantly because August 14th happens to be my birthday, so it was a big gift for me, right? The relevant parts of that act is Section 101, which is the lead rules, which limits the amount of lead that can be used in surface coatings or paints and substrate materials. It's limited to 90 parts per million for surface coatings and 100 parts per million for substrates. That is for all children's products. That includes toys and children's non-toys. 102 is the certification and third-party testing rule. And since 2009, all children's products have to have been certified. This is under what's called a GCC, or a General Conformity Certification. All importers and manufacturers of children's products entering US commerce since 2009 have had to have a certification. Up till now, that has not required party test report other than some special things like surface coating, paint, lead content, and small parts and pacifiers and rattles and a few other things. They have required testing. Section 103 is a tracking label requirement, and I believe since the middle of 2009, all children's products and their packaging have required what's called a tracking label or a tracking mark. This is similar to a date code. The purpose of the mark is such that the importer or manufacturer is able to ascertain the production location and the production date of the product. And this is used in the event of a recall. The law says it has to be applied to the product and packaging as much as practicable, which means if the product is too small, if it's a pair of earrings or something that is too small to have a tracking code put on it, then you can put it on the package. The law says it has to go on both, but there are allowances. Section 105 covers what's called advertising of toys and games. And I'm sure you're all aware of products you see in the marketplace, toys and children's products that will have a small parts warning on them. A little rectangle that says, warning, choking hazard, contains small parts not suitable for children under 3. Before this law, that was not required to show up anywhere on a website or in a catalogue. When this law went into effect, anything that's advertised in a catalogue or on a website for which products are directly available to consumers, in other words, they order it from the catalogue or the website and it gets shipped to their house or their office, that warning has to be on the website or the catalogue adjacent to the product. That's a law. It does not apply to ad sheets that markets and local stores give out as throwaways where the consumer has to go to the store to actually buy the product, and it does not apply to B2B catalogs. If they're just business to business, you don't have to include that, but they are required for all consumer type catalogs and mail order websites. Section 106 made the ASTM F963 previously voluntary toy safety standard mandatory. It is now mandatory under the law that all toys have to comply with that standard. And Section 108 is the section that bans or restricts certain phthalates in children's products and in toys and childcare articles. And the sections that are missing from there are not relevant to this discussion. Next, please, Mike. Excuse me. So let's talk about definitions here for a second. The consumer law defines children as consumers aged 12 years of age and younger. under a legal definition, 12 years of age and younger means 1 second before the 13th birthday. So there are people who think that if you sell a product and you mark it for ages 12 and up, that it gets past any legal requirements, and it doesn't. If you're going to do that, it has to be age 13 and up, or even 14 and up. Or you don't mark it at all and you just market it as a general consumer product. A children's product is described as a consumer product that's designed and intended primarily for use by consumers aged 12 years of age and younger. A toy is very similar, defined as a consumer product designed and intended primarily for use by children under 12 years of age and younger while playing. Okay? Now I'm talking only about US law, because Canada, for instance, if you sell in Canada, they have a different definition. They include anything that is used by a child while playing and for teaching or learning. So educational products in Canada come under a toy classification, which is not so in the US. Next, please. So in the law, factors that are used to determine whether a product is a children's product or not, and this is quoted right out of the federal regulations. One is a statement by the manufacturer about the intended use of the product, including the labeling on the product, if such labeling and intended use is reasonable. In other words, if a manufacturer or importer labels their product for adult use, it has to be suitable for adult use. It cannot be a child's product that is just labeled for old people. That's against the law, okay? It has to be reasonable. Whether the product is represented in its packaging, display, promotion, or advertising as appropriate for children 12 years of age and younger. If the product is packaged for children, if it's got pictures of children using the product on the package, if it's sold in a toy store, if it's displayed in a toy store, if it's advertised, promoted, marketed, intended for children, it probably is a children's product, okay? And the other two are, one is whether the product is commonly recognized by consumers as being a children's product. I mean, if the product is in a store and the average consumer is going to look at it and say, that's intended for children, it's probably a children's product. And the final determination in the law is the age determination guidelines. This is a wonderful 300-plus page document that is available on the CPSC website free of charge. I refer to it almost every day of the week. It's a great guide for what products are used by children at certain ages and how they use the products. That's the final factor in determining whether a product is a children's product. Next, please. So, let's talk about the third-party testing rule. The official designation of this is in CFR 1107. CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations. The official name is Testing and Labeling Pertaining to Product Certification. The final rule, as published, is applicable only to children's products, as I've just described them, and becomes mandatory for all products manufactured on or after February 8th. That means that any products that have been manufactured already, they're already in stores, they're already in warehouses, they're on the water, or they're in the factory, in the warehouse, waiting to ship, but they're already manufactured, as long as you have documentation to that effect, those products are not affected by this law. It is products that are manufactured on or after February 8th that are required to meet this legal requirement. The key parts of the law are that, number one, all children's products must be certified, and as I mentioned, that has been in effect since the end of 2008, that all children's products have to be certified. The difference is that and the certification is the responsibility of the importer or manufacturer. When I say importer or manufacturer, importer is easy. Manufacturer means the domestic manufacturer if the product is made in the US. This is applicable to everybody. It doesn't exclude anyone just because the factory is in the US. This is requirement under the CPSIA Section 102, which I was meant out just now, which is known as the GCC, General Conformity Certification. Some companies call it a COC, which is a Certificate of Compliance. It's the same thing. Chairman Tenenbaum of the CPSC last year coined a new phrase. She calls it a CPC, which is a Children's Product Certificate or certification. It's actually the same thing as a GCC or a COC. The difference now is that effective February 8th, all products manufactured on or after that date must be supported by third-party testing reports. Next. There's some important definitions in the 1107 rule. The first one I'm going to talk about is called due care. And in the rule it states that due care means the degree of care that a prudent and competent person engaged in the same line of business or endeavor would exercise under similar circumstances. Due care does not permit willful ignorance. What that means in a nutshell is that if you're purchasing a product from a factory, you should know enough about the manufacturing process of that item that if you were making it yourself, you understand how the factory is going to make it. Okay, and I'm going to talk some more about that in a second. Another definition is something that's called a high degree of assurance. Or this means an evidence-based demonstration of consistent performance of a product regarding compliance based on a knowledge of the product and its manufacture. This means that you've got to know the product, you've got to know how it's being manufactured, and you have to have a high degree of assurance that every single one of those products made is going to comply with the requirements. Representative sample and identical in all material respects means that there's no difference with respect to compliance to the applicable rules, bans, standards, or regulations between the samples that are tested and the actual product that's going to be produced. So any samples that a factory or supplier submits to a test lab for testing have to be representative of the product that's going to be eventually produced. SGS personally recommends that you have somebody, a third party, go to the factory to pull those samples, because factories all over, doesn't matter where they are, have a tendency to submit really nice samples to the lab for testing. Some people call them golden samples, some people call them Hollywood samples. In many cases, they're hand-picked when they submit them to the lab because they know they're going to meet the requirements. That is not a production representative sample. If the lab goes out and pulls the samples from the factory from an early production line, there's a much better chance that they're going to represent what's actually in production. Material change is another thing that's defined. It means any change to the product design, manufacturing process, or sourcing of component parts that a manufacturer exercising due care knows or should know could affect the product's ability to comply with the applicable rules and regulations. It doesn't mean changing one material to another material. If you're using textiles, it doesn't mean changing from nylon to polyester. It doesn't mean changing a plastic material from polypropylene to ABS. A material change is any change that affects the design or the compliance of the product. Next, please. So a little bit more about due care. In the rule, as I said, it really means that the company that's importing the products or manufacturing the products in the US should know as much about the goods and who they're being manufactured by as they would know if they were making them themselves, okay? This is not so difficult in the case of a large manufacturing company. If you're looking at large businesses that have their own factories, or they've been working with large factories in foreign locations, and they understand the production process. Maybe they design their own products. They have a really good understanding of how the products are made, and they're in a good position to know that they are taking due care in having products made. This is extremely different for an importer to do who is ordering things from a website, from a catalog. You see things online, you order them direct from the factory, or you go to a sourcing company or a trading company offshore, and you say, I really like that product, I want to order 10,000 pieces or 100 pieces, how much are they, and here's my purchase order. Those kinds of companies may not know anything about the product or the manufacturing process, and they're the ones who are really, really susceptible to failure in this law. Violations to compliance with these requirements can end up with blacklisting. Customs and Border Protection is now working with the CPSC at the ports of entry into the US to stop and inspect products. They will be looking mostly at high-risk products. They're looking at childcare articles. They're looking at pacifiers, rattles, teethers, anything that a child will put in their mouth. They're looking at children's pajamas, sleepwear, anything that has to meet the children's sleepwear flammability requirements. They are not looking necessarily at a lot of party items, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just letting you know that some of the items here may not be on the high-risk list, but they are checking. And if they get 2 or 3 failures from either the same importer or from the same factory source, they will blacklist that product, and means that they will stop every shipment coming for that importer or from that factory, and they will pull them out and they'll inspect them and they'll check them for lead or small parts or whatever they need to do. And that may go on until they reach some point in time where they have confidence that they don't see any failures from that importer or that factory. Something you need to watch out for, because the factory may be selling to a number of different importers, and you may place a first buy with them not knowing that they're on the blacklist. They're not going to tell you. I mean, I believe there is access to US Customs files where you can inquire if certain factories are on the blacklist. You just need to be careful who you're buying from. In this particular case, SGS and other third-party labs can help by factory auditing, factory inspections. We can do capability audits to verify that a factory actually has the capability of making your product. How long they've been in the business, do they have the necessary technical and quality management support to actually manufacture a product that complies with requirements. We offer that service, and it's a good thing to take advantage for. Does it cost money? Of course it does. But it may stop you from having a recall or having your products confiscated by customs at the port of entry and losing everything, where you can't sell them. Next, please. The other definition I want to talk about is a high degree of assurance. This means different things to different people. But generally, it means the importer or manufacturer's knowledge of their products, the knowledge of how products are manufactured, their knowledge and relationship with the suppliers, consistency versus variability, consistency in product testing results or product function, quality, appearance. If you get a poor paint job, it just looks bad. If the factory can't make a good quality product, chances are they also can't make something that's consistently safe or meeting regulatory requirements. Measurements showing consistent performance. You can ask the factory to send you inspection reports, have them do them internally, and send you what they have. Control over component parts. You can ask the factory where they buy component parts. If you've got a product that's got button cells in it, button cells have to be free of mercury. Ask the factory where they're buying their batteries, and do they have a certification that there's no added mercury in the batteries. If they're buying electronic components to go inside a plush toy, ask them where they're getting their electronic components from, and are they buying from the same supplier every time they make that product. It's really control over the supply chain. You don't have to get into the details and try to control it yourself if you're an importer, because that's virtually impossible. But if you are a big manufacturer and you have contact with large factories that have been in business a long time, this is easy stuff. Evidence that a product currently complies with the applicable rules and regulations and standards. I mean, that can be done by, again, internal testing reports. You don't need to be paying a test lab to keep continuously testing a product. You can ask the factory to do that if they've got good management systems, good quality management systems. Next, please. Let's talk about material changes. As I said before, it's not just changing a fabric or changing a plastic. A material change occurs if a children's product has a change in a design or the component parts, in the composition of the product, any interaction or functionality when assembled. If somebody decides to change the function or the performance of the product, that could be a material change in the product. Changes in the manufacturing process. And this can include changes in production line operators. If you order a product now and you order 1,000 pieces and they produce them in February, and then 6 months later you order the same thing from the same factory, when they set that production line up to make the other 1,000 pieces order, they may not have the same production operators on that line, and they may not be trained as well. Technically, that is a material change. Legally, it's a material change. You may have to have the product retested at that point because they're setting up a new production line. Sourcing of component parts, which is not only component parts, as I mentioned before, in the way of electronic or parts or batteries. It can be paint. If you've got a product painted and the factory decides to buy the paint from a different supplier, the paint may have lead in it. If you've got T-shirts that are being silkscreen printed, they may switch the ink supplier on their silkscreen prints. If they do that, they may be putting paint on that's got lead or phthalates in it. That kind of stuff is going to get flagged and stopped by US Customs if they decide to check it. The manufacturer must always submit a sufficient number of samples, representative samples, to a third-party lab for testing. There is some debate over what a sufficient number of samples is, and that can vary. If it's a really complicated product, more samples may be required, or they may be more frequently required. If it's a very simple product, maybe you only need a few samples, you know. Testing has to occur with the issuance of a passing test report before a children's product can be certified by the importer or manufacturer. So you've got to have a third-party lab test report that shows compliance before you can issue your certification. If the first test gets a fail result, the law requires that corrective action is taken by the factory or the importer. Corrective action does not mean send some more samples to the lab and see if they pass this time. Or let's send the samples to a different lab and see if they pass. That's not something you want to be doing. If you get a failure, somebody has to identify the failure, take whatever action is necessary to correct that failure, and then resubmit the products for testing, and when they get a pass report, then you can recertify or certify the product. A children's product cannot be certified unless you get a passing test report or a passing test report for a retest. Okay, next please. Other things that are important in the third-party testing rule is a couple of things. One is a little section called undue influence, and that says that every importer or manufacturer must have a policy or procedure in place to prevent any undue influence being placed on their employees on a third-party test lab to influence the test results. You can call it bribery, coercion, persuasion, take them out to dinner, give them a bottle of scotch, whatever you want to call it. Anything in that area is called undue influence. It can also include sending products to another test lab to see if you get a different result. That can be, and especially if you say to the other test lab, hey, this test lab just failed my product, I'm going to ask you to test them and I'm looking for a pass result. That's undue influence, is in telling the second lab that you've had a failure already and you're expecting to get a pass. It's not as difficult as it sounds, because all you really need is a one-page document written for the attention of any employees who have direct contact with a test lab, and that simply would say something like, the company does not permit any influence over test labs that may affect the results of testing. Any employee found to be engaged in this activity is subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination. And you have a place where the employee can write their name and sign it and date it. That's a policy. It includes training so the employee understands what the requirements are. If you're working with sourcing or trading companies, you can send a similar letter to them and ask them to sign it and send it back to you. You've got something in writing that says they understand your policy. Does it mean that the trading company is not going to cheat? No. It just means that you've done due diligence and you've got a signed document. You've done your part to comply with the law. There's a requirement for record keeping, test reports, any testing plans, material changes, any undue influence procedures and training. All of those have to be kept on record. They don't have to be hard copies. They can be electronic copies. But they've got to be kept for a period of 5 years after the production is finished or after your order is finished. Next, please. And under the testing rule, last but not least, if you meet all the requirements and you've got all your ducks in a row, the CPSC law allows you to label your product to state that it is meeting the requirements. And they did tell you what wording you can put on there, and it is meet CPSC safety requirements. They don't allow any other wording. They don't imply that the CPSC has actually either tested the product or approved or endorsed the product. Those are the only words allowed on there if you choose to put them on, if you know the product, if you know with a high degree of assurance that your product consistently meets all of the regulations and requirements and standards, you can put that statement on your product. Now I'm going to tell you something personal, and this is not necessarily the opinion of SGS management. I recommend to people that you don't put that statement on your product, or any other statement suggesting that the product complies with safety requirements or meets regulations. The reason is, from a legal point of view, if you get a failure and you get something that injures a child or a person and it goes to court, and you have a statement on your product that says this product meets safety requirements or this product complies with safety requirements, you're actually adding a statement suggesting that you think that product meets the safety requirements. If it doesn't, and they test it and they prove that it doesn't meet the requirements, not only do you have a product that doesn't meet requirements, you've got a false statement on the product. So my personal recommendation is that you don't put a statement on your product that says this product is safe, or it meets safety requirements, or meets any other kind of requirements. The only thing that you're required to do by law is to have certification backed up by test that you're confident the product meets requirements. This is not mandatory. This is you may put it on if you want to. I suggest you don't. Next. In simple terms, this rule means that if you order a product and you get it tested and you have a test report and the product gets shipped, you've actually met the requirements of the law. There is a requirement that toys or children's products are tested at a minimum once a year. That would apply to products that are continuously in production. It would apply to products that you may place several orders of, as long as they come from the same factory and you're confident that they're using the same materials and the same components as the previous order that you made. A test report is good for a year. After that period, if you continue buying the product, it needs to be tested again. Okay? If every product shipment you make has a passing test report, that satisfies the law. Next, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's called the component testing rule. By the way, these federal regulations are available online free of charge. If you want them, you just Google CFR 1107 or 16 CFR 1109, and you'll find a website where these are published, and you can download it, you can save it, you can print it and read it. It's government speak. It's in government language. It's not easy to understand, which is why people like me at different test labs can offer technical guidance to clients when they've got questions. 16 CFR 1107, which I've just been talking about, the third-party rule, as I said, becomes mandatory February 8th. 16 CFR 1109, which is the so-called component testing rule, has actually been in effect since December 2011. But this one is not mandatory. This is a voluntary guideline. And what it basically allows is components to be tested. If you're buying a number of different products and they are using common components, if you buy T-shirts that are made in 6 different sizes but the fabric is all the same, you only need to test the fabric once. You don't need to test every size. If you're printing silkscreen printing on the T-shirt and it's the same ink used on all 6 sizes of T-shirt, you only need to test the ink once. You don't need to test every size of T-shirt. If you've got plastic components, if you've got an assortment of products that use the same plastic component in it, you only need to test that component once. You don't need to test it individual product. That's what the component testing allows. If you are buying a bunch of products from the same factory and they've all got the same red paint on them, the red paint only needs to be tested once. You don't need to test it on every single product that you put it on. This is called component testing and component and material testing. It allows importers and manufacturers to pay less money to get one test done instead of a whole slew of them. It also allows what's called compositing. If you've got 3 different colors of paint, you can put those 3 together. The lab can put them together and do one test on 3 colors at the same time. They can test plastic materials the same way. You can put 3 different plastic materials together and test all 3 of them for lead with one test. You don't need to test every single plastic and every single color. The only difference is they've got to be the same material content. You can't test fabric and plastic together. You can't test metal and plastic together. You can't test paint and plastic together. They've got to be what they call like materials. The other thing about testing components is that if they're tested as a component, the production process cannot change that component in a way that may affect the compliance of the product. If you've got a plastic part and you test it as a component, and then during the production process you drill a hole through it, it may make it weaker. That is changing the component, which means you then have to have it in the finished product. If there's no change to the product, to the component, in either material or process terms, then you don't need to have it retested. Any testing for components, you have to maintain the records for 5 years, and records to support traceability of the components have to be kept. They can be kept by the factory. Components should be logged by lot numbers or batch numbers or production dates. As I said, this is a voluntary standard. You may not choose to use a component testing scheme. You may choose to have your products tested as complete products. But if you do decide to use component testing, then this rule has to be followed. Okay, next please. Let's talk about California. Very recently, a court settlement was put in place in California under Proposition 65, specifically for Halloween items. And the first section of it addresses Halloween costumes, accessories, and games for children. And California uses the same definition as the federal government, which is consumers aged 12 years and younger. They're defined as costumes and articles that are intended to accessorize a costume, including, but not limited to, wigs, masks, gloves, footwear, belts, bags, hats, costume props, hosiery, weapons, jewelry. And jewelry, by the way, has to meet separate lead and cadmium standards in California. Makeup is from this requirement because makeup requires FDA testing, which is a little bit more strict than the California Prop 65 stuff. The requirements for these items is for arsenic, cadmium, phthalates, formaldehyde, and lead. And these ppm is parts per million, and we have a information sheet on this over here with Scott if you'd like to take one. And the reason I've highlighted some of those in orange, the 300 parts per million for cadmium and 20 parts per million for formaldehyde, can you next please? Is that for non-children's products, which is essentially adult costumes, which is the same descriptions, includes the same things, they also have the same elements, but for cadmium, there's no 300 parts per million limit for children. There's only a 75 ppm soluble limit. And for formaldehyde, there is only a 75 parts per million for children aged over 3. So the other limits go away. But basically the same, except a little bit looser. On the lead requirements for children's Halloween products, the lead limit is 100 parts per million for substrates. For adult items, it's 300 parts per million. So there's a higher limit. Next, please. And we look at this. This also covers indoor and outdoor home decor and games for adults and children. It's just one set of requirements. And this includes things like candy bowls, lawn, wall, door, tables with lights or not lights, decorative spiders, spider webs, lighting, ghosts, witches, goblins, skeletons, bats, cats, tombstones, everything you can think of that might be used as decorative products in your yard, in your trees, in your house, on your door, anywhere you like. They have to meet these requirements, which are essentially the same as the other items. The interesting thing to note here is that even though this is specific to Halloween items under California's Prop 65, there's no doubt that sometime in the not too distant future they're going to include Valentine, graduation, July 4th, Easter, any of those other festive occasions which is going to include children's and adult costumes or accessories and house and lawn decorations. I'm sure this is going to spill over into those areas. So if you're doing any of that kind of stuff, you should also be aware of these limits and requirements because they are going to be affected. Next, please, Mike. Next. There you go. So what do we advise everybody? What we advise everybody is, number one, safe products are the goal. Safe products are made by a deliberate process. They don't happen by accident. It's not a hit and run process. The company, the importer, the manufacturer must be committed to safety and compliance. You should have a plan. Safety and quality should be built into the product. If you're not designing your own products, you can submit prototype samples to a test lab and we'll test the prototypes to see if they meet the requirements before you start placing orders. Ask your supplier to give you a few samples that can be tested. Quality and safety cannot be tested or inspected into a product. If the quality or safety is not good, it doesn't matter how many times you test it or how many times you inspect it, it is never going to make the product better. It's always going to stay the same. You should use and know the right suppliers. You should know who you're buying from. Understand the production processes if you can. And that includes people like SGS. If you're going to work with SGS, understand the test lab, know who we are, and we'll work with you. And we can help you develop plans to understand the standards and meet compliance. Next. There's a few useful website links here. The first one is the CPSC website. which has a search box on it. You can just type keywords in there and find things. The second one takes you directly to the CPSIA, the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, which is focused on children's products. The third one will take you to the website that tells you how to define a children's product and what's the difference between a children's product and a general purpose or general consumer product. The next one is the age determination guidelines. As I mentioned, you can save that. It's a PDF file. Load it to your desktop if you want to. It is a invaluable guide to what age children you should be targeting products to. The next one is a website for small batch manufacturers. There are allowances for small batch manufacturers. If you do less than $1 million in sales and you have orders that are less than 10,000 pieces per year, you can qualify and register as a small batch manufacturer, which allows you to not have to have all the third-party testing done. There's a gentleman at the CPSC by the name of Neil Cohen, who's known as the Small Business Ombudsman. He is easily available. His name and phone number are on the website. He's easy to get a hold of, and he is an extremely helpful person. Even though he's government, he will go out of his way to help you figure out ways to keep your testing costs down, which is not something that SGS likes, but, you know, it's like Macy's sending people to Gimbals, you know. The last one is the small business website, which has additional information for small businesses. If you'd like to leave your business card with Scott, we can send you a PDF version of this presentation so that you don't need to write down these website addresses, okay? And any questions you have, please feel free to direct them to Scott. Next. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. And my email address is also on this presentation when you get it's best to contact Scott if you've got questions. Yeah, he's here for another couple of days. But even after that, pick up his business card. If you've got questions, email him. I just concentrate on toys and children's products. We have technical directors for food contact items, for restricted substances, a specialist for Prop 65. What else do we have? Electrical and electronic products, automotive, all kinds of stuff. Individual product technical directors who are based in the US in real time and can get you answers. Okay? Thank you.